Girls, happy Tuesday. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day and I hope you had an awesome weekend. Just remember that on Mondays, your assignment was to get your 45 minutes of iReady reading and math finished. And if you have not done that, they need to be completed by Friday. Let's just go ahead and jump right in. So, last week, we talked about comparing and contrasting informational text. And we learned that we do this with the Venn diagram. Well, this week, what we're going to be learning is we're going to be comparing and contrasting setting, theme, and plots of multiple stories written by the same author. So our essential question is, how can I compare and contrast two texts written by the same author? Today, what we're going to do, we actually have a busy day today, so make sure that you are paying super close attention. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to listen to a vocab rap song on the 5 story elements. We're going to learn about some new vocabulary. You're going to want to write these down because it's going to help you with your assignment later. We're going to listen to Jumanji by Chris Van Allsburg, and we're going to listen to Zathura by Chris Van Allsburg. And then we're going to compare and contrast the characters, the setting, and events and themes of both stories using a graphic organizer. And then finally, you're going to complete a vocab quiz to make sure you have learned all this vocabulary for this unit. Let's start with our vocab video.
Check it out, yo. Yeah. Setting, that's like where it's going down. Could be the train compartment, a castle, or a town. Could be the Arctic winter like to build a fire. The temperature's dropping, excitement's getting higher. Setting sets the scene so the scene seems set. Could be an Italian restaurant where we met. Setting gives us the where and the when. Could be modern day, the future, or way back when. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Is the action, the question, satisfaction. What's going down? What's going to happen? 4 men a seat in an open boat, rowing and hoping that they could stay afloat. The plot, they had to make it to the beach, but the waves a bit big and the shore seems out of reach. Plot is a series of events like Lemony Snicket. It could be crazy, wild, or straight wicked. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Knock, knock. Oh, it's the characters, the people in the story who carry out the action. Characters can be pretty tiny or clean. Characters can be silly, whiny, or mean. Juliet is a character, and so is Romeo. Pokemon has characters, and so is Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters can be dogs, lions, or hippos. J.K. Rowling chose Harry Potter. Who knows? Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. So you snack back in your backpack when I'm finished. Something going wrong. That's the conflict, kids. A struggle in the plot. Now who's on top? Could be a fight for money like some robbers and cops. Could be an internal conflict, a struggle inside. Like I don't want to tell the truth, but I don't ever want to lie. Fix something in your eye, now you're conflicted. What created drama? The conflict did. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. The theme of the story is the main idea, the central belief, or the topic that's in there. It's usually something abstract like sacrifice, isolation, and resurrection. We back to life. Like don't lie, don't practice libel. The theme of To Build a Fire is survival. Survivor on your own like 5-0. What? Vocabulary, something that you have to get. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting.
All right. All right, so now we're going to talk about some vocabulary. So the first 2 vocab words that we're going to talk about, they're just going to be review. We talked about them last week. Our first one is to compare. So comparing tells how 2 or more things are alike. So ask yourself, how are these two animals the same, or how are they alike? Well, they can both be pets. They can both live in a house. They both have ears. They both have noses. Be specific. Now we have contrasting. So we're going to To contrast is when you tell how two or more things are different. So how are these animals different? One's a cat, one's a dog. You usually walk a dog. You don't usually walk a cat, but some people do. So now we have a new vocab word here, and this vocab word is setting. And the setting is where and when a story takes place. And when you are answering what the setting of a story is, you want to think about the location, the time of day, and the weather, because sometimes the weather can tell you maybe it's happening in winter, maybe it's happening in summer, maybe it's happening in spring. So what's the setting of this image? We can take that back off. The setting of this image is it's sometime during the day and it's in the woods. So it's in the woods is the where, and when is during the day. Now we have plot. Plot is the events in the story that take place and how they relate with each other. Every story has a conflict or a problem and a resolution, which is a solution. So we've talked about problem and solution, and that just means that there's going to be an issue in a story, and the character's going to have to try to overcome that issue and come up with a solution. So next we have characters, and everyone knows what a character is, but I'm just going to talk about that now. A character is a person or a thing in a story that does something. So who are some characters in this video?
I suffer from short-term memory loss.
Yes! That's exactly what you say.
Okay. We'll pretend to be the other kids now.
Hi, Dory.
Ahoy there! Do you want to play hide and seek?
Okay.
We'll hide, and you count and come find us.
Okay, Daddy.
No, not Daddy. I'm the nice fish who wants to be your friend. Okay?
Okay, Daddy.
Now,
I'm hiding.
now count to 10.
1, 2, 3, 4. I like sand. Sand is squishy. Mommy, can I go play with them?
Dory?
So you can ask yourself, who are the characters in that story, in that video? Well, there's Dory and her parents, but then there's also some characters that are not main characters, who are the fish that are swimming in the background. You can also ask yourself about the problem and solution. What is the problem in that video? Well, Dory suffers from short-term memory loss. What's the solution? Well, I'm not going to ruin the end of the movie for you, so you're going to have to watch that movie if you want to know. Next, we have conflict and resolution. So a conflict is the problem of a story, and a resolution is the solution of a story. If we look at this image, what is the conflict and resolution of this image? So it looks like the boy and the girl are fighting for the basketball, which that would be the conflict. That would be what the issue in the story is. Well, what's the resolution? What's the solution? It looks like they decided to start playing together. That way they both get a chance with it. All right. Theme. The big idea that the author is trying to express to the reader. We have to infer this, meaning we have to take everything that we already know in our brains and everything that the author is telling us, and we're going to have to come up with the message that the author is trying to send us. If you think of the book Little Red Riding Hood or the story Little Red Riding Hood, what is the theme of that story? What is the big overall message that the author wants us to know? The author wants us to learn that we shouldn't talk to strangers. But the author doesn't directly say that in the text, so we had to infer that. We had to come up with that with our own reader brains. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to two stories, Jumanji and Zathura. Those are both two of my favorite movies and books, and I'm so excited that we get to listen to them today. But while you're listening, I want you to be active listeners, and here's some things that you can start thinking about to help you be an active listener. Who are the characters in both stories? Where do both stories take place? What happens in both stories? And what is the theme of both stories? All right. So while the first one's playing, I'm going to move myself off camera so we can see the entire screen.
Jumanji, written and illustrated by Chris Van Allsburg. Now remember, Mother said. Your father and I are bringing some guests by after the opera, so please keep the house neat. Quite so, added Father, tucking his scarf inside his coat. Mother peered into the hall mirror and carefully pinned her hat in place, then knelt and kissed both children goodbye. When the front door closed, Judy and Peter giggled with delight. They took all the toys out of their toy chest and made a terrible mess. But their laughter slowly turned to silence, till finally Peter slouched into a chair. You know what, he said. I'm really bored. Me too, sighed Judy. Why don't we go outside and play? Peter agreed, so they set off across the street to the park. It was cold for November. The children could see their breath like steam. They rolled in the leaves, and when Judy tried to stuff some leaves down Peter's sweater, he jumped up and ran behind a tree. When his sister caught up with him, he was kneeling at the foot of the tree, looking at a long, thin box. What's that? Judy asked. It's a game, said Peter, handing her the box. Jumanji, Judy read from the box, a jungle adventure game. Look, said Peter, pointing to a note taped to the bottom of the box. In a childlike handwriting, there were the words, free game, fun for some, but not for all. P.S. Read instructions carefully. Want to take it home? Judy asked. Not really, said Peter. I'm sure somebody left it here because it's so boring. Oh, come on, protested Judy. Let's give it a try. Race you home. And off she ran with Peter at her heels. At home, the children spread the game out on a card table. It looked very much like the games they already had. There was a board that unfolded, revealing a path of colored squares. The squares had messages written on them. The path started in the deepest jungle and ended up in Jumanji, a city of golden buildings and towers. Peter began to shake the dice and play with the other pieces that were in the box. Put those down and listen, said Judy. I'm going to read the instructions. Jumanji, a young people's jungle adventure especially designed for the bored and restless. A. Player selects piece and places it in deepest jungle. B. Player rolls dice and moves piece along path through the dangers of the jungle. C. First player to reach Jumanji and yell the city's name aloud is the winner. Is that all? Asked Peter, sounding disappointed. No, said Judy. There's one more thing, and this is in capital letters. D. Very important. Once a game of Jumanji is started, it will not be over until the player reaches the Golden City.
So far we have met some characters. We've already started learning about some events that are going to take place, and we are on our way.
No big deal, said Peter, who gave a bored yawn. Here, said Judy, handing her brother the dice. You go first. Peter casually dropped the dice from his hand. 7, said Judy. Peter moved his piece to the 7th square. Lion attacks. Move back 2 spaces, said Judy. Gosh, how exciting, said Peter, in a very unexcited voice. As he reached for his piece, he looked up at his sister. She had a look of absolute horror on her face. Peter, she whispered, turn around very, very slowly. The boy turned in his chair. He couldn't believe his eyes. Lying on the piano was a lion, staring at Peter and licking his lips. The lion roared so loud it knocked Peter right off his chair. The big cat jumped to the floor. Peter was up on his feet, running through the house with the lion a whisker's length behind. He ran upstairs and dove under a bed. The lion tried to squeeze under, but got his head stuck. Peter scrambled out, ran from the bedroom, and slammed the door behind him. He stood in the hall with Judy, gasping for breath. I don't think, said Peter in between gasps of air, that I want to play this game anymore. But we have to, said Judy as she helped Peter back downstairs. I'm sure that's what the instructions mean. That lion won't go away until one of us wins the game.
So now we have a conflict. They cannot get rid of this lion until they finish playing the game. So Judy already knows the solution to the problem, but let's see if they're going to be able to carry it out.
Peter stood next to the card table. Can't we just call the zoo and have him taken away? From upstairs came the sounds of growling and clawing at the bedroom door. Or maybe we could wait till Father comes home. No one would come from the zoo because they wouldn't believe us, said Judy. And you know how upset Mother would be if there was a lion in her bedroom. We started this game, and now we have to finish it. Peter looked down at the game board. What if Judy rolled a 7? Then there'd be 2 lions. For an instant, Peter thought he was going to cry. Then he sat firmly in his chair and said, "Let's play." Judy picked up the dice, rolled an 8, and moved her piece. "Monkeys steal food, miss 1 turn," she read. From the kitchen came the sounds of banging pots and falling jars. The children ran in to see a dozen monkeys tearing the room apart. "Oh boy," said Peter. "This would upset Mother even more than the lion." "Quick," said Judy. "Back to the game." Peter took his turn. Thank heavens he landed on a blank space. He rolled again. Monsoon season begins. Lose 1 turn. Little raindrops began to fall in the living room. Then a roll of thunder shook the walls and scared the monkeys out of the kitchen. The rain began to fall in buckets as Judy took the dice. Guide gets lost. Lose 1 turn. The rain suddenly stopped. The children turned to see a man hunched over a map. "Oh dear, I say, spot of bad luck now," he mumbled. "Perhaps a left turn here, then... No, a right turn here. Yes, absolutely. I think a right turn. Or maybe..." "Excuse me," said Judy, but the guide just ignored her. "Around here, then over... No, over here. And around this. Yes, good. But then... Judy shrugged her shoulders and handed the dice to Peter. 4, 5, 6, he counted. Bitten by tsetse fly, contract sleeping sickness, lose 1 turn. Judy heard a faint buzzing noise and watched a small insect land on Peter's nose. Peter lifted his hand to brush the bug away, but then stopped, gave a tremendous yawn, and fell sound asleep, his head on the table. Peter, wake up!" cried Judy. But it was no use. She grabbed the dice and moved to a blank. She rolled again and waited in amazement. Rhinoceros stampede. Go back 2 spaces. As fast as he had fallen asleep, Peter awoke. Together they listened to a rumble in the hallway. It grew louder and louder. Suddenly, a herd of rhinos charged through the living room and into the dining room, crushing all the furniture in their path. Peter and Judy covered their ears as sounds of splintering wood and breaking china filled the house. Peter gave the dice a quick tumble. Python sneaks into camp. Go back 1 space. Judy shrieked and jumped up on her chair. "Over the fireplace," said Peter. Judy sat down again, nervously eyeing the 8-foot snake that was wrapping itself around the mantel clock. The guide looked up from his map, took 1 look at the snake, and moved to the far corner of the room, joining the monkeys on the couch. Judy took her turn and landed on a blank space. Her brother took the dice and rolled a 3. "Oh no," he moaned. "Volcano erupts. Go back 3 spaces." The room became warm and started to shake a little. Molten lava poured from the fireplace opening. It hit the water on the floor, and the room filled with steam. Judy rolled the dice and moved ahead. Discover shortcut, roll again. "Oh dear," she cried. Judy saw the snake unwrapping himself from the clock. "If you roll a 12, you can get out of the jungle," said Peter. "Please, Judy begged as she shook the dice. The snake was wriggling his way to the floor. She dropped the dice from her hand. 1 6, then another. Judy grabbed her piece and slammed it to the board. Jumanji! She yelled as loud as she could. The steam in the room became thicker and thicker. Judy could not even see Peter across the table. Then, as if all the doors and windows had been opened, a cool breeze cleared the steam from the room. Everything was just as it had been before the game. No monkeys, no guide, no water, no broken furniture, no snake, no lion roaring upstairs, no rhinos. Without saying a word to each other, Peter and Judy threw the game into its box. They bolted out the door, ran across the street to the park, and dropped the game under a tree. Back home, they quickly put all their toys away. But both children were too excited to sit quietly, so Peter took out a picture puzzle. As they fit the pieces together, their excitement slowly turned to relief, and then exhaustion. With the puzzle half done, Peter and Judy fell sound asleep on the sofa. "Wake up, dears," Mother's voice called. Judy opened her eyes. Mother and Father had returned, and their guests were arriving. Judy gave Peter a nudge to wake him. Yawning and stretching, they got to their feet. Mother introduced them to some of the guests, then asked, "Did you have an exciting afternoon?" "Oh, yes," said Peter. "We had a flood, a stampede, a volcano. I got a sleeping sickness," and Peter was interrupted by the adults' laughter. "Well," said Mother, "I think you both got sleeping sickness. Why don't you go upstairs and put your pajamas on? Then you can finish your puzzle and have some dinner." When Peter and Judy came back downstairs, they found that Father had moved the puzzle into the den. While the children were working on it, one of the guests, Mrs. Budwing, brought them a tray of food. "Such a hard puzzle," she said to the children. "Daniel and Walter are always starting puzzles and never finishing them." Daniel and Walter were Mrs. Budwing's sons. They never read instructions either. "Oh well," said Mrs. Budwing, turning to rejoin the guests. "I guess they'll learn." Both children answered, "I hope so."
All right. So that is the first story, Jumanji. And what I want you to do is I want you to start thinking, what were the names of the characters? Where did the story take place? What happened in the story? And what was the moral or the theme of the story? Also, if you're still here in this video, I'm telling you today's code word is going to be pineapples. So on your assignment today, make sure you click that code word pineapples. All right, let's listen to this last story.
Hello, and welcome to Read Aloud Stories with Mrs. R. I'm Mrs. Rosenthal, but a lot of kids like to call me Mrs. R. Zathura, a Space Adventure. Written and illustrated by Chris Van Allsburg. "Mom!" Danny Budwing yelled. "Mom!" Walter and Danny's mother stopped at her son's bedroom door. "Walter," she said, "get off your brother. Honestly, if you don't stop pulling on his nose like that, it'll end up looking like an elephant's trunk." "Oh, yeah?" said Walter. "Then I'll need the ears to match." He let go of Danny's nose and grabbed his ears. "Enough!" Mrs. Budwing shouted. "Danny started it. Look what he did," Walter yelled, picking up his walkie-talkie. The antenna was dangling by a wire. "See? He breaks everything." "I'm sure he didn't mean to," Mrs. Budwing said. "It was an accident," Danny mumbled. From downstairs, Mr. Budwing called to his wife. "We're going to be late." Mrs. Budwing gave her sons a kiss goodbye. "I set some dinner out in the kitchen. Dad and I shouldn't be too late." "Can't you take him with you?" Walter whined. After their parents left, Walter sat down in front of the television. "Can me and you go out and play catch together?" Danny asked. "It's you and I," said Walter, "not me and you. And the answer is no." Danny really wanted to play. He threw Walter his hat, but Walter just ignored him. Then he tossed him a baseball and beamed him on the head. Walter jumped up. "All right, you little fungus. Now you're really going to get it." Danny bolted out of the room, down the hall, and out the front door with Walter close behind. They ran into the park across the street, but Danny couldn't outrun his brother. Walter tackled him. "I'm telling," Danny squealed, as Walter got a grip on his nose and pulled. Then he let go. "Hey, what's that?" he said. Right next to the boys was a long, thin box resting against the tree. Walter got off his brother and picked it up. "Aw, it's just some dumb old game. Here," he said, poking Danny in the stomach with the box. "It's for babies, like you." He trotted off as Danny read the words on the box. "Jumanji, a jungle adventure." Danny stuck the game under his arm and ran home after his brother. Back inside, Danny looked at the box. It was covered with pictures of jungle animals. He took out dice, some tokens, and a very plain game board. Walter was right. It was a babyish game, and probably boring too. Danny started to put it away, but discovered, jammed tightly into the bottom of the box, another board. He banged the box on the floor, and out it popped. This board was more interesting. It showed flying saucers, rockets, and planets in outer space, with a path of colored squares leading from Earth to a purple planet called Zathura and back to Earth. Danny put a token on Earth, then rolled the dice. After he'd moved along the path, something surprising happened. A buzzing sound came from the board, and with a click, a small green card popped out of the edge right in front of him. He picked it up and read, "Meteor showers. Take evasive action." "Hey, Walter," Danny started to say, "what does when he was interrupted by a noisy rat-tat-tat-tat sound coming from the roof. Walter looked up from the television. "Holy smoke," he said. "Must be a hailstorm." "It's not hail," shouted Danny, holding up the card. "It's meteors." The noise grew louder, like 1,000 golf balls bouncing off the roof. The room got so dark, Walter turned on the lights. Then, kaboom! A rock the size of a refrigerator fell through the ceiling and crushed the television. "See," Danny said, "I told you. Meteors." Walter stared at the hole in the ceiling. "Okay," he agreed. "Meteors. But how'd it get so dark so fast?" Through the hole, he could see what was left of his parents' bedroom. And beyond that, a black, star-filled sky. "It looks like night up there." "It's not night," said Danny. "It's outer space." "What are you talking about? Geez, outer space," Walter muttered as he went to the front door. "We just lost track of time. It's night, that's all." He threw open the door and almost took a step outside before he realized there was no outside there anymore. At least not the one he expected. "See," said Danny, "outer space." He led Walter back to the living room and showed him the Zathura game board and the card. Walter sat with his head in his hands, gazing at the path of colored squares that wound around the board and ended back at Earth. "Looks like," said Danny, "we keep on playing or we're up here forever." "Great," said Walter. "Up here with you forever." He took a deep breath, put a token on Earth, then rolled the dice and moved along the path. The board started buzzing, and click! A card popped out. He studied it silently, then tossed the card on the board. Danny leaned forward and read, "The polarity on your gravity belt is reversed. I wonder what that means." He looked up, but Walter was gone. "Walter!" he called out. "Up here," answered Walter. Danny looked up and saw his brother pressed against the ceiling. "I've lost my gravity." "That's not all you're going to lose," Danny said nervously, because he could see that Walter was being pulled slowly toward the hole in the ceiling and a lonely trip into outer space. Walter realized it too and started clawing at the ceiling, but he couldn't keep himself from moving closer and closer to the hole. Danny looked around. Lying next to the meteor was the cord from the shattered television. He tossed it to Walter, who knotted it tightly to his belt. Danny grabbed the end of the cord and tied his brother to the sofa. Danny rolled the dice and moved his token along the path. Click, out popped another card. Your gyroscope is malfunctioning. Suddenly, the house tilted. Everything in the room slid to one side, and Danny got buried under a mountain of furniture. He slowly dug himself out, clutching the game, only to find that Walter was floating back toward the hole in the ceiling. Danny tied him to the sofa again and handed up the dice. Walter rolled and got his gravity back, dropping to the floor with a thud. Danny moved his piece and handed him his card. Your robot is defective, Walter read. From the hallway came the sound of rattling metal and a steady clank, clank, clank. The boys stared at the doorway as a shiny silver robot stepped into view. He was having trouble walking on the tilted floor. His head rotated back and forth and seemed to freeze on Walter. The robot's eyes lit up, and he spoke in an odd mechanical voice. Emergency! Emergency! Alien life form! Must destroy! His claw-like metal hand snapped open and shut. Uh-oh, Danny whispered.
Okay, so for time's sake, I'm going to skip the middle of this story. And we're going to start working on the graphic organizer. So if you would like to listen to the rest of that story, type in Zathura in YouTube, and it'll let you. All right. So let's talk about the setting of both stories. So how are they similar? Well, the setting, they're both set in like fantasy worlds. They're not really real worlds. Both stories in fantasy. And how are they different? Well, Jumanji takes place in a jungle, but Zathura takes place in space. If you haven't seen both movies, I recommend watching them. They are two of my all-time favorite movies. It's not on here, but let's talk about the characters first before we move on to plot. So how are the characters similar in both stories? Well, in both stories, they are siblings. And how are they different? Well, Danny and Walter in Zathura, they're just brothers. And Judy and Peter in Jumanji are brother and sister. All right, now let's talk about the plot. Remember, the plot is the events that take place, what happens. So how are they similar? Well, in both stories, the siblings are playing like a wild game where whatever, depending on what they roll, it comes true. So in both stories, the siblings are playing a wild game that makes things happen to their houses. They face some challenges. Well, how are they different? Well, in Jumanji, they face challenges on Earth. But in Zathura, they face challenges in space. And the last one, theme. How are they similar? Well, in both stories, they learn to work together, so teamwork. They learn to rely on teamwork to get through challenging obstacles. I can't see my words on here, so I'm not going to write. And how are they different? Well, in Zathura, the theme or the big message could be following directions, but in Jumanji, it could be read the directions before starting something. All right. Now, for your assignment today, what you're going to do when you get into Canvas, you are going to be completing a vocab quiz. So what you're going to do, you're going to click homeroom, you're going to click ELA, you're going to click today's day, which is Tuesday, and then you are going to start this quiz. It's 10 questions, and it's about all the vocabulary that we talked about in the beginning of this video. And then for the final question, you're going to select today's code word for the instructional video. After that, you're going to hit submit, and it will give you a grade. All right, boys and girls, have a good day. Bye.